My name is Marissa McMahan, and I'm the Director of Fisheries at Manomet. This is a presentation of green crab population trends observed in Manomet's long-term intertidal crab monitoring project, which began in 2018. I want to first start with a map to orient viewers to the monitoring sites, which span much of Midcoast Maine. Our southernmost site is called Sandy Point, which is in Casco Bay, and our northernmost site is the Damariscotta River. We also have sites in the New Meadows River in West Bath, in Hermit Island and Phippsburg, and 3 sites in Georgetown at Five Islands, Robin Hood Cove, and Reed State Park. We've had varying levels of capacity for monitoring these sites over the past 4 years, so not every site shown here has been surveyed every year. Next, I just want to talk a little bit about the methods we use for monitoring these crab populations. As I've mentioned, this is an intertidal survey, and we target the low intertidal area of rocky shorelines. We use a meter square quadrat as a unit of measurement, and we sample 10 of these quadrats at each site every month from either April or May through November. Although there is some variation in when we can access sites and how much capacity we have for sampling every month from year to year. So we collect all the crabs that we find and take several measurements, including size, sex, shell condition, and color. And this is actually a picture in the lower right here of a 4th grader measuring a green crab during a survey that we conducted with a local elementary school. So jumping right into results, first, I just want to point out some really clear differences that we see in populations between sites. So let's look at 3 of our sites shown here on the map for reference. And first, I want to look at density. So this figure is showing the average number of green crabs per meter squared at New Meadows, Robin Hood, and Sandy Point from May through November. So I quickly just want to point out that one of the first things that really jumps out here is that the New Meadows tends to have higher densities of green crabs than any other site. So you can see those gray bars representing the New Meadows, and you can see how high the density is there compared to these other sites. And we do see this primarily, this trend in the summer and fall at the New Meadows, this high density. Another interesting thing we see is that Robin Hood and Sandy Point have their highest densities in the spring, and then it really starts to taper off. So we can start trying to interpret what's going on here by also learning something about the local environment. So for instance, the New Meadows is quite a bit warmer than these other sites. Sandy Point is much more exposed to wave action and more open ocean conditions. And some of these sites also have differences in native species populations like lobsters and rock crabs. And so that in turn may impact how many green crabs that we're seeing from one site to the next. And these are important things to keep in mind as we're trying to assess these populations. There's also differences beyond just the abundance of green crabs among sites. So for instance, we see differences in the ratio of male versus female crabs. So this figure shows the percent of crabs sampled that were male. So for example, you can see here in May that 100% of the crabs found in the New Meadows, which is the gray bars, 100% of the crabs found in May were male. About 50% in Robin Hood were male, shown by the purple bar, and about 30% were male at Sandy Point in May, shown by the yellow bar. So you can see a big difference across those sites, but you can also see seasonal changes within the sites as well. So if you look at just Sandy Point, which is the yellow bars, you can see the population shifts from 30% male in May to 100% male in August. And this is likely due to biological factors like the reproductive and molting cycles of the crabs, and also the presence of other species that might compete with green crabs. So for instance, a highly competitive environment may be better suited to the larger size aggressive males. And also things like environmental factors like temperature are also likely impacting these trends. And then the last difference that I'll point out between sites is size. So this figure is showing the frequency of different size classes of green crabs broken down by 10 millimeter increments. So you have 0 to 10, 10 to 20 millimeters, 20 to 30 millimeters, etc. So you can see there tends to be smaller crabs in the New Meadows. Again, those gray bars sort of showing that there's a high frequency of those smaller 20 to 30 millimeter carapace width crabs. And then you can see the yellow bars, which are Sandy Point, showing sort of this tendency for there to be larger crabs at this site. More frequently, we're seeing 40 to 50 millimeter carapace width crabs at this site. And this is certainly connected to the sex ratio. So that figure I showed before. So we tend to see female green crabs are smaller. And so we're seeing that these sites like the New Meadows, where we're seeing more female crabs than male crabs, we're also seeing sort of this shift towards smaller bodied crabs. Whereas at Sandy Point, where we're seeing more males, we see a shift towards larger crabs. So I just want to take a deeper dive at one of our sites to explore some more seasonal trends. So this is the density at just the New Meadows site from 2018 to 2021. We don't have as much data from the early spring. So we only have April data from 2021. We only have May data at this site from 2019 and 2021. But you can see something really interesting going on in the spring recently at this site. So in May of this year, we found an average of almost 8 green crabs per meter squared. So that's that really tall patterned bar that you can see. That's really off the charts. We've never seen a density that high at any other site in any other year. And in June of 2020, we also saw record high density. So we're seeing these really big spikes in green crab density in the spring and early summer. Prior to 2020 and 2021, we would typically see low abundance in the spring and a gradual increase over the summer and into the fall. But in the past 2 years, we're seeing these explosions of crabs on the shoreline in the spring and early summer, which is, obviously leading us to wonder what's happening here. And we're not entirely sure. It could have something to do with overwintering success, food availability, temperature. But I think ultimately what we're seeing here is that, these types of monitoring activities are incredibly important for catching these sorts of population trends and these changes in abundance, and then informing sort of what steps we can take for mitigation and adaptation. The final trend I want to talk about is shell condition, and this is pretty specific to the development of a soft shell green crab industry. So in order to produce the lucrative soft shell crabs, you need to harvest pre-molts, or crabs that are close to molting and becoming soft. So we've been monitoring shell condition in order to determine when and where these pre-molts can be found, and then relay this information to fishers. So this figure shows female crabs in the New Meadows at the top and male crabs on the bottom figure. And then the percent of the crabs sampled that are pre-molt, soft shell, or hard shell. So for the females, that top figure, we actually see a peak in molting in June and July, and then again in September and October. And for the males on the bottom figure, we see molting is primarily in May and June, so an earlier sort of spring and summer molting season for the male crabs. Although this year, which is not shown here, the data from this year, we actually started seeing pre-molt males as early as April. So we're seeing that molting is really starting to occur earlier in the year. And again, that could be tying into why we're seeing those spikes in abundance in the early spring and summer. So to wrap this up, I just want to talk a bit more on what we're doing with this data and how we're applying it. So first and foremost, long-term monitoring like this is one of the best ways to increase our understanding of green crab populations in general. And from that, we can then inform conservation and shellfish stock enhancement efforts. For instance, we can make suggestions on when and where reseeding flats might be ideal, or where clam protection might be the most important. Or we could send out early warnings in years like this one, where we're seeing record high abundance. There are also clear uses for fishery development, like determining when and where to harvest pre-molt crabs, and even where abundance is greatest for other high volume markets, like the bait market or animal feed markets. We can also maybe start to predict future trends of green crabs as we see the ocean environment changing. And finally, we're very excited for the data portal that's being developed by the Casco Bay Regional Shellfish Working Group, because that potentially represents a way to make all of this green crab data open to the public and really maximizing its use. Thanks so much for watching this quick presentation, and please visit our website to learn more about this effort.